HR people of Reddit, what's the most NSFW reason someone got fired from your place of employment? A guy I worked with was fired because he worked 3 full-time jobs, and it turned out he was sleeping for 6 hours on his shift. This was on night shift at a Home Depot. He used supplies from the store to build himself a platform above the rug-cutting machine, and had a whole setup he slept in for almost a year until he was caught climbing in the machine on camera. We all just thought he was crafty at the job and wasn't getting anything done. He is secretly my hero. Story 2. Woman was providing BJ for cash over lunch breaks. The first word mentioned about her lunch breaks, and she asked if she can just quit and leave immediately. We let her do that. Story 3. I'm not in HR, but I once worked with a company where they had to fire some people because the CEO caught them having a group sex in the office after a staff party. Story 4. I worked at an amusement park when I was in my teens, and one of the guys they hired to work the game booths was regularly trading the large prizes for BJ. He'd go on break, get a BJ, then have the woman come up and he'd pretend they won. Management caught him giving away prizes, thinking he was just giving them away as flirting, but he proudly told them that he traded them for BJ. He was 18 years old. The average age of the women were 30 years old, and the giant stuffed bear cost $7 wholesale. Story 5 had a girl yelling at me after I fired her husband. He was a manager at one of my stores. He told her we fired without cause because we were losing money. I let her go on for several minutes, insulting the company, threatening to sue us, and all that. Then I let her know he was fired for harassment of a girl. An 18-year-old asked him to get something off a shelf for her. He said only if you do BJ first, with 4 witnesses. A bit of realization set in her face, and she walked out without saying anything. Story 6. I had to let a guy go from a production line. This was in a small giddy plant, and most of the people on the hand pack line were women. I hired this guy. He presented not crazy like some others, and things were good for a week. The second week there, he didn't like that he couldn't sit until breaks. So he started telling the ladies on the line that he knows how to hit a human, and nobody would miss them in this small town. The women all rushed my office at break, and I had to call the police before I called him to the plant manager's office. As soon as the offending guy walked in, he said, "I knew them would say something. This plant is majority woman-run." I looked at the plant manager. She nodded, and I told him that we had to let him go due to the disturbing things he said, and that he is also trespassed from the plant grounds. The officer followed him out to his car, and that was the last we saw of the guy. He called 2 weeks later, asking if he can drop off fundraiser items people bought before he was let go. I told him to leave them at the police station. The items were never dropped off. The people that gave to him were reimbursed by the plant owner. It wrapped up nicely, but at the same time, what the heck? Story 7. Someone where I worked had a manager fired for cheating on his wife with another employee. His wife also worked at the same company. They were caught together at work on company property. Story 8. Guy was running a side business producing adult calendars. Got caught because our sysadmins noticed he was soaking up some ridiculous fraction of our bandwidth. He was downloading astronomical amounts of adult film. I fired him on the spot and had him escorted from the building. Then I instructed my secretary to clean out his desk and box up his belongings. She walks out of my office and over to his cubicle, comes back to my office 30 seconds later and says, "Nope." Story 9. Dumbest reason ever. Lazy salesperson parked in a handicapped parking spot while visiting a customer. Got a ticket. Tried to get the customer company to pay the ticket. Finally, asked if ticket could go on expense account. That one went all the way up to the CEO, fired that Friday. Story 10. Had a coworker, we'll call him Larry, and he's from an Eastern European ex-superpower. Larry was a real piece of work. Would come in with like chains, crazy bling rings, and jewelry. The works. Well, one day I'm sick, and when I come back the next day, I hear someone had said something awfully in the team group chat, but it's since been deleted. A few more days go by, and as I'm walking to the bathroom, I run into Larry, who is wearing his general getup of ridiculous attire. I tell him, "Good morning, Larry," and he responds with, "Hey, spider bubble, damn you." Realizing he's joking around, I tell him, "Well, your shoes look like crap." He's wearing one bright neon green sneaker and one bright neon pink sneaker. They did, in fact, look like crap. A few days go by, and I get called into HR for insulting a coworker's clothing. Nothing came of that, but it was odd. A month or so after this, Larry gets fired for reasons not publicly shared. But that evening, we go to have drinks with a few coworkers, and someone had invited Larry. We get some drinks, and I eventually get to talking to Larry. He admits that I got called into HR because he reported me to deflect, because that day he got called into HR for saying some crap in the group chat. He then admits that this job was just whatever for him, because before he used to run a brothel out of an RV. He loves escort, he tells me. And while we were working together, he would spend half his paycheck every month, one paycheck per 2 weeks, roughly $2,500, on a single night with an escort. Because, look at me, I can get girls that are like a 6, but when you pay for it, then he kept saying how much he would love to get with our Indian coworker, continuously calling her Vishnu. That was not her name. It wasn't close, but did start with VE. I asked him what he was going to do now that he's out of a job, to which he replied that, well, I can't stay at my apartment. I just got in a fist fight with my landlord. After probing that story, turns out his landlord is a woman, a veteran, and he instigated the fight by punching her in the face. He also mentioned he couldn't go back to his home country because he is a deserter from the army, as he joined and deserted shortly before taking this job in the US. Not sure where Larry is now, but he was crazy. Story 11. Obligatory, not HR, but some dude got fired for poor performance. He had just gotten a new laptop, which was on his desk, and happened to have his old laptop still, which was kind of junky and sitting at his house. So dude got a woman he knew who still worked there to go to the office the next day, which was a Saturday, and swap his old laptop for his brand new laptop. The office building had security cameras in the lobby, and you had to scan to get on the elevators and at the main doors to our offices on our floors. So when it went to secure the laptop on Monday, realized it was not the new laptop they were expecting, remembered it being there on Friday, because they checked after firing the guy. Well, it took 3 minutes to put everything together. So idiot not only got himself fired with his crap performance, he also got his friend fired for stealing his laptop. And yes, they made him give the laptop back. Story 12. Not HR, but I had someone fired for trying to poison me. Found out about it because she drew pictures of herself doing it to me and people I know. There were other drawings of her beating me and putting me to sleep forever and robbing me. The kicker? She signed and dated every drawing. I'd known this woman for 20 years prior. This was completely out of nowhere. Story 13. This was back in 2014. I worked at a call center in San Diego. A bunch of new temp hires just finished their mandatory 2-week training and was starting their first real day on the job. Mixed group of folks. One of them was a roughly 24-year-old man who had no previous job experience. We sat in an open floor plan call center, meaning no cubicles, with people sitting next to you, behind you, and in front of you. Well, a woman on the team who sat next to this guy asked management to move her. Didn't really explain why, other than she just wanted to be placed somewhere else. They moved her next to me and we quickly became work buddies. I leave shortly after as I had found better employment. Well, guess what? She calls me one morning cracking up because the guy was arrested at the job that morning. Literally like 10 minutes into his shift, the police were there. Turns out it'd been documenting the amount of adult film he's been watching on computers, downloaded gigs, and even get it off a couple times at work. This was in 2016. My father was like the guy in my previous story, but he worked at a bank and it was CP. I don't talk to him anymore. Story 14. QA manager fired for rubbing one out in his car over lunch break. Caught on surveillance video. Analytical chemist group leader fired for calling her staff a fat, lazy N-word. HR director fired for streaming Netflix all day long, and her door was closed all day long. She was literally employee 3 at a company that ended up with 100 and thought she was untouchable. IT director fired for botching up a software changeover and crippling 95% of computers for days. Facilities engineer fired for banging logistics girl in the mezzanine. She was married to another guy that worked there. She kept her job, but not her marriage. Story 15. Am HR person. And I could write a book on the topic, but there are 2 that stick out in my mind. First was a case of harassment where a male employee, standing next to another male employee, beckoned a female employee to come over to him by doing the come hither motion with his finger. When she came over, he said to her, at full volume, "Wow, if I can get you to come over here with 1 finger, imagine what I could do with 2. Second was a case where the only cash register at a location was stuck shut. One employee took it upon himself to take a hammer and beat the crap out of the register until it opened, breaking it, and then proceeded to take all the money out of it. All of this was on video, by the way. When confronted with this, his defense was, "I thought if I got it open, I could keep the money," despite no one saying anything remotely close to that. Story 16. Not in HR, but an infamous story from my first call center job. One of the workforce supervisors was at the company holiday party and got really drunk. He had a history of alcohol issues. He started to act out and began to hit on another supervisor's wife loudly. Eventually, that supervisor, who was his friend, and who was known for being very large and strong, basically put him in a gentle bear hug to try to physically remove him from the situation, room, and avoid any more embarrassment, awkwardness. The drunk workforce supervisor wiggled free and went under a long table where some of the food was set up. He crawled under the whole length of the table, barking like a dog, and then came out from under the table and bit one of the HR generalists on her leg. This workforce supervisor was hired on at my new company a few years later and was horrified that I was there from our old employer and begged me not to tell anyone what had happened. He had gotten himself cleaned up, fortunately. Story 17. Fired a guy for not showing up for 2 or 3 days straight. When he finally did, like nothing happened, I asked him what was up and he casually just said, "Oh, I accidentally took too much substances and passed out for 2 days." Let another guy go after he failed to return from his weekend vacation I'd given him time off for. Not answering phone. No one knew where he was. I was worried and ended up calling his emergency contacts, and it turns out he was in rehab, not on vacation. He was gone for like 2 weeks before I found out what was actually going on. Told him straight up if he had told me what was going on, he'd have a job, but instead he has a lesson. Buddy fired a gal who had worked at the place for 10 years for drinking all the vanilla extract. Gallons of it for years. He was doing inventory. It was a popular breakfast place, bakery, and realized they went through about 500% more vanilla than they ever actually used. Checked cameras, found her drinking it all day long. He fired another couple dudes for a scam they had been running for years themselves. 2 friends, 1 work days, 1 work nights. Day guy would click himself in the AM, then instead of clocking himself out when he left, clock his buddy in. 2 hours later, his buddy would show up for work, clock the first guy out instead of clocking himself in, and then clock himself out at close. They each got an extra 2 hours a day, every day for like 5 years. Don't know who was running the place before he got there, but damn. I got an honorable mention since this guy kept his job after I verified his ridiculous story. Dude shows up 7 hours late for his shift, saying he was locked in a cave. Turns out, he and a friend actually got locked in a cave and would have been there all night if one of the employees, tourist attraction cave system, hadn't come back to get something. Story 18. Temporary associate whipped out his package and started beating it while looking at a female employee while standing on a catwalk above her in the middle of the work area, where we had very obvious cameras. Story 19. Not in HR, but had been promoted to head counselor in a children's camp I used to work at years ago. 2 counselors that were staying in the camp, sleeping in the tents with their teams of kids, decided to have sex. This was not allowed on campgrounds, obviously. There were more than 5 places where they could have sex without getting caught. They decided it was a great idea to do it in the tent while a bunch of kids were sleeping. A little girl woke up, saw them, and ran away screaming because she thought the guy was beat her counselor. So in the middle of the night, we all rushed out of our tents because a child was screaming and saw the girl running, her counselor chasing her to calm her down, half naked with her breasts still hanging out, and the guy counselor chasing after them, yelling at them to be quiet. They were fired on the spot. I had to make up something to calm the poor kid down and deal with her, understandably, furious mother in the morning. Story 20. Assembly line stopped working to have a twerk-off. 6 people fired for twerking for 20 minutes, while a 7th judged the winner. Maybe would have gotten away with it if they hadn't moved directly in view of a security camera. They were surprised it was a fireable offense. Story 21. I'm not in HR, but I used to work with a guy who was universally reviled. I'll call him Creepo because he was incredibly creepy, with a dead stare and skin the queasy color of buttermilk. Most people at that job were some flavor of mentally ill and unfortunate looking, though so I wasn't sure why he was so uniquely hated. One guy was fired for putting nails in his tires, which wasn't a very bright thing to do when there were cameras in the parking lot, but he turned out to be a vigilante hero. Creepo was a pedo with reams of CP on his computer at home. He's rotting in prison now. Story 22. Oh yes, I actually have an answer to one of these. I used to work at a magazine publishing company. I was pretty close friends with the editor of one of our health magazines. She was really good at her job and a kind person. I was absolutely floored when I came to work one day to learn that she was fired. Turns out that in the dark recesses of our magazine library, she and one of the graphic designers were having full-blown intercourse. What makes matters worse is she was fired a day after a bunch of us just returned from a weekend out of state for her wedding with another man. She's still married to that man and has a couple of kids now. I know he knows. But I haven't been in contact with them for many years now outside of seeing the occasional social media post. About 6 or 7 of us in the office went to the wedding, and boy, did we feel very conflicted about it afterwards once we learned why she was fired. I didn't know the graphic designer, who was also fired, very well. He was a quiet guy who did his job. I rarely conversed with him. In terms of how they were discovered, as far as I know, she was talking to other coworkers about what she was doing on our work messaging platform, similar to Slack but not Slack. I couldn't believe how idiotic somebody could be to talk about something like that on a company channel. It's like she wanted to be caught. Story 23. Not HR, and no longer with the company, but one woman was fired after accusing another employee of stealing her meds. She posted it on FB and tagged the store manager. Whole ass investigation went off. Thing is, she had a habit of forgetting she took her meds. And when the manager went to check things out, he found a few pills that had fallen out of her bag under the lockers. So he was pissed she accused someone so publicly. And B, that our porter didn't clean under the lockers. She was escorted off the premises by LP. They got involved because of the very public nature of her accusations. Story 24. I was an experienced senior in a job I used to work at. A few new employees started, and they asked me to have one of them shadow me. No problem. We would use a Y-split headset so they could hear in on our service desk calls. First or maybe second day, he made it apparent he needs a pay advance for rent, as he won't get paid for the first 2 weeks since they just missed the pay schedule. Anyways, he's there for about 3 days, then disappears. We hear he's sick, and I remember thinking that's very unfortunate timing. Weird. Monday happens and he's back, and he's extremely sore in the way he's walking and sitting. Apparently, he had his appendix taken out. I was alarmed and concerned and asked the usual, "Shouldn't you be at home resting a few weeks?" He said, "Yeah, but he's contact for the first few months, and that means more unpaid time off." While he was in the hospital, his girlfriend broke up with him and basically took everything from their apartment, so he's also dealing with that. 2 days go by, and everything is normal. He rolls in like usual Thursday morning with a huge crap-eating grin on his face, like he can't contain his joy. So I eventually mentioned, "Oh, you're looking happier." He said, "Sure. Can you keep a secret?" I relent and say, "Yeah, I mean, it depends on what that is usually, but sure." He opens the Sunday Sun, major newspaper in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, at least at the time. Turns to page 7, and his face is there right under TI Bank in Canada robbed yesterday. A perfect still from a security camera showing his face close up, in perfect detail saying, "Suspect shown above," etc. So I'm thinking, oh man, I have to say something, at least by lunch. Turns out that never needed to happen. He told one of our coworkers that he went on smoke breaks with a very friendly, outgoing, chatty gal who was very nice to talk to. She went straight to our manager and told right away like one should. Within a short while later, 2 police officers come to my desk, arrest him, ask me maybe a question or two, but nothing serious. He still got the newspaper with him and gets carried away. He messaged me a month later. He was fired, of course. Through email saying he got off with parole because he's a first-time offender, did not have a weapon, nor does he have any. He literally used the old finger in the shape of a gun in his jacket pocket, etc. Also, the money was nowhere to be found. He paid off his debt. Bank has insurance. Pretty crazy day. Story 25. He won Employee of the Year. As the HR person, I was supposed to go with him so the conference where he and the other award winners would be honored. 2 weeks before we were supposed to travel to Albany, he disappears. Totally out of character. We tried everything to get in touch with him. We called for a welfare check by police. We called his emergency contact, who cursed me out then hung up on me. Nothing. I was checking newspaper articles to see if they found a dead body that fit his description. Anything I could think of. Finally, I decided to do a database search of the prisons. Found him. Locked up for second-degree abuse. It was one of those person you'd least expect situations. Gentle, soft-spoken dude. Wild. Story 26. Had a manager at McDonald's who was an addict. She got caught BJ her husband off in the walk-in, but she didn't even get fired for that. She was regularly stealing money from the register to fund her addiction. The owner felt bad and paid for her stint in rehab. She came back and did it again. Story 27. He attacked another employee in the break room because he took the last soda. He was very calm afterwards and told us, "I understand I'm fired. I just want to go on record on why I had to beat them." We told him it wasn't necessary and had them escorted out of the building. Story 28. My first job was as a parking lot attendant. I was training a new hire in the easiest job since I had an appointment that day and had to leave for an hour or so. Upper management knew what was going on. Lower management did not. I got back, saw I missed a call from work, and clocked on. Immediately, the head cashier pulls me aside and asks me why I went AWOL, and I explained myself. Luckily, dodged a write-up, but the new hire was also AWOL. The store, a big store too, was completely out of carts. Then a customer interrupted us, saying they couldn't get into the parking lot. The head cashier and I went outside. Our new hire was attempting to bring in every single cart, and a fair amount of the lumber carts, all at once. This was not a store that had a motorized cart pusher, so he was doing it all by hand. He also managed to block the main entrance in doing so. Me, WTF are you going? Him, my job. Me, by bringing in all of them at once? Him, well, it seemed like a waste of time to do them one at a time. Me, so why aren't you doing loadouts? Him, I saw the products, it didn't seem like I was needed. Me, but you don't get to ask that. Him, well, they should only call me for real loadouts. Story 29. A not HR, but supervisor in a meat department. We had to fire a closing clerk and meat cutter because they decided to 1. Steal a bottle of vodka from our liquor store. 2. Drank the entire bottle of vodka between the two of them. 3. Got into a water fight using our industrial hose and cleaning solvent hose. 4. Destroyed $5,000 worth of electronics in the water fight. 5. Realized they were soaking wet and decided to strip down to their undies. Put on butcher coats to hide that fact. 6. Put their soaked clothes on a food rack and pushed it into our walk-in oven to dry their clothes. 7. Attempt to finish their shifts while wearing nothing but boxers and butcher coats and completely hammered. 8. Did all of the above between 9 in the afternoon while the store was still open and with customers and other staff watching. Story 30. It's not exactly that this guy was fired, but instead he got a different job offer and announced his leave. So my previous employer without mentioning anything confidential, is in a highly new field that is still very heavily being developed. Around the globe, there are plenty of companies attempting to do the same. But let's say this field is definitely not yet at a mature level in terms of scientific and legal challenges, but is quite competitive. This guy in question was already very weird to deal with, like the pale, socially awkward guy, but did seem pretty intelligent. So then, when announcing he was going to leave, he had his goodbye party at the company and everything. Still all normal up until this point. However, this guy then suddenly came in a day after his last official day with some excuses that he forgot something. Naturally, people were sort of confused about it. So then, our IT department discovered that this genius of a guy had downloaded tons of confidential files and documents all to his computer. What's more is that his new job was going to be a direct competitor in a different country. Obviously, when the company discovered, they immediately pressed charges, and the guy even admitted having done this. I'm not even sure where this guy took the audacity from to do such a stupid act and hoping to remain undiscovered. I also truly wonder whether it's the case that the other competitor pushed him into doing this, or whether he thought it'd make him come into his new company as a hero. Needless to say, he definitely didn't get that new position, and based on LinkedIn, it seemed like he didn't get anything else for quite a while. At one point, he appeared as an account manager at one of our main suppliers. But when we discovered his name, we very clearly stated, of course, that we had had extremely bad experiences with him and didn't wish to have any business contact with him. So far on his LinkedIn, his current employment is still the original company I was working at. This way like 2 years ago. So it seems like the guy was served some karma and damaged his career for quite some time to come. Story 31. I got harassed by a guy and they fired him. Someone walked in and found him forcing himself upon me outside the bathrooms and went straight to a manager because they could see that I was protesting and pushing him away. I was about 20, and he was late 30. I had walked out of the ladies and he just grabbed me and pushed me up against the wall. This was after months of asking me on dates, even after I said I had a BF, and telling me daily how good I looked. I knew he was interested, but I naively thought it was harmless and just brushed him off until this incident. He stopped once he realized he'd been witnessed, but she had gone straight to the boss and reported it, and he was let go. Story 32. Not an HR manager, but I was a manager with a lot of direct reports who had to deal with a lot of HR issues. In the 2010, I was a call center manager who had some employees who worked in remote offices. I was driving to one of those offices to fire one of my employees who had falsified hundreds of call records while sitting at her desk, doing absolutely nothing. When I got there, the office manager pulled me aside and told me that said employee had gotten into a verbal altercation with one of the customers that came into the office in the middle of the space with everyone watching. Because that customer's daughter had broken up with that employee's son, and there were allegations of cheating afoot. If she hadn't been getting fired for the fraud, that would have been enough. She had other write-ups. The office manager then proceeds to tell me that after that verbal altercation, the employee left the office, sat out in her car waiting for the customer to leave, saw the customer walk out, got out of her car, grabbed the customer by the arms and shoved her back up against the brick wall of the office, telling her if she ever spoke to her son again, she'd hit her. And this all happened literally 24 hours earlier. The office manager just found out about it 10 minutes before I walked in from taking a call from said customer who said they were looking at pressing charges and wanted to know if the security cameras caught anything. To my knowledge, she didn't press charges. No idea how that situation resolved. 2 years later, that employee messaged me on Facebook when she saw I was advertising a job opening and asked if the company had marked her down as available to rehire. I told her I would love to have cojones as big as hers to even think about asking such a goddamned ridiculous question, and I blocked her. Story 33. So I'm not HR, but I was the person who was fired. I had a coworker who was a joker that could go a little too far sometimes. One of his go-to pranks was to throw people's tools off the roof we were working on. There is one thing you do not mess with in trades. That thing is people's tools. I was already not having a great day. I was tired, stressed, and sore from a recent family argument along with losing a close friend of mine. I'm working quietly on the ventilation unit that we're supposed to be installing for the customer when I hear a clinking sound behind me. I pause the music I had playing in my earbuds and turn to see Joker holding my toolbar over the edge of the roof. I stand up to go get my bags. Dude, don't I'm already not in a good mood. Whoops! Joker then proceeds to throw my toolbar off the roof. It hits the ground with a thud and kicks up a good amount of dirt. Being done with people at that point, I tell Joker, "See you at the safety meeting then," and proceed to shove him off the roof. Now to be clear, both Joker and I were wearing harnesses specifically made to handle this kind of fall as it was required by OSHA and the company. Joker falls and ends up about 2 feet from the ground. He's okay, but visibly shaken and definitely in need of some new pants and a new harness since his met its threshold. Meanwhile, about $5,000 of my tools are pretty much broken. All of my Milwaukee tools are cracked. The main part that I'm upset about is the batteries. Oftentimes, the batteries can be more expensive than the tools. Luckily, with the exception of a couple dike cutters and a good set of needle nose pliers, all of the wrenches, sockets, and ratchets seem fine. I clean up my stuff and go down the ladder. I clean up my tools, throw them in my bag, dust the bag off, and head to my truck. I throw my tools in the passenger seat, turn the truck on, turn up the radio, and leave. I came back the next Monday to get fired. Luckily, this story has a somewhat happy ending. The company replaced all my broken tools for free. Joker didn't end up getting punished. In the exit interview, both the company representative and I agreed that issues with coworker behavior was going to be the reason we gave for why I left. Damn you, Jay, you piece of crap. Story 34. I worked at a daily newspaper through college. I was a junior reporter covering wrecks, murders, police raids, and the ilk. A newsroom at the time was the Wild West with all kinds of dysfunctional personalities, broken marriages, and substance abuse issues. One of those people was the paper's religion editor. This guy was an unfortunate case. He had been born with an entire spate of birth defects, which combined to give him this goblin-like appearance. He couldn't drive and had this weird, shambling stride. They didn't hire him. He just showed up one day and started working. They felt sorry for him and eventually gave him a desk and a paycheck. If he were interviewing people, he'd have to get a taxi to see them. And when he finished with the religion page for the week, they'd put him on the copy desk or some such. To give you a feel for this guy's status, he was about 50, and they'd trust 18-year-old me to handle stories over this guy. Like I said, it's a sad case. Leonard had two issues. One was his slapdash way of cleaning himself after going to the bathroom. This explains why his desk was always by the end of the aisle, by the restroom, and away from everyone else. Second was his adult film addiction. He would stop by the adult bookstore downtown before heading into work, shoving his new purchases into his big valise. Meanwhile, the editor was this fire-breathing redhead of a guy. Think of every stereotype of what a daily paper editor would have been like, and that's your guy. He personally liked me because I was a young, ambitious whelp who didn't cause too much trouble, but he ruled that newsroom with a rod of iron. One day I was finishing up a story at my desk when the editor marched down the aisle toward Leonard's desk. He was obviously in a pissed-off mood, meaning everybody got out of his way. He gets to Leonard's corner and starts to rip the guy a new one because he'd made a mistake on a story on kosher food at the local Jewish community center. The photograph was of a bunch of kids eating potato chips, and the editor had just been on the receiving end of an uncomfortable phone call with a rabbi. After chewing Leonard out, the editor asks, "And why do you smell like crap all the time?" Then he kicks poor Leonard's valise. The case opens, and some of the most egregious adult films you can name come spilling out. Leonard is shuffling around in his awkward way, trying to scoop up the offending material and stuff it all back into his bag while the editor is berating him about A, his crappy reporting, B, the aromatic cloud of poo that surrounded him at all times, and C, the adult film that he brought into the newsroom. Fired him right then and there. It was crazy to witness. Story 35. I ran a small consulting firm and had an excellent relationship with one of my first net new clients that I had landed. 5 years into us supporting them, I get called into the founder's office, and there are 4 people that I had never met in there. My client had just finished one of their most lucrative contracts that they had ever done, and the books did not look like it. They had hired a forensic accounting team to look into it, and they had said there could be 3 people that had access to be able to embezzle money, and I was one of them. I immediately said that we cannot support them while we were under investigation, and gave them some recommendations for someone to take over and said that we would need to go through an attorney. We are talking $2 million in lost money. Even before the people that I had recommended could get a chance to start working for them, they lost a drive on their mail server, and the investigator said that they could clear me quickly since I could get things back up and running more easily than anyone else. After clearing me, I asked for more details on what they were looking for, and they said the other 2 were the owner of the company, the one that hired them, and the controller. I had been to the controller's house, so I did a log search on the emails that contained the number for her house, and the last 4 of one of the company credit cards, and got $200,000 in things being sent to the controller's house in 30 minutes. Gave that to the FBI, and they were able to get warrants off of just that. Some of the charges were things like $300 per week in fresh flowers delivered to the house, beauty treatments over $1,000 every month, renting a trailer in Shreveport that eventually came out. It was to use for an affair. The controller pled guilty and was sentenced to 4 years in prison with probation after that. The whole thing was interesting and helped boost my experience in security services. Story 36. Not HR, but we were sent a training video by our partner company we had a contract with on their new Instagram connection. The video was recorded by our account rep showing how to use the new features. In the video, she opened her iPhone pictures to upload one, and in that flash on the screen, all 9 recent photos from the phone were extremely graphic, dirty selfies. Toys, up-close shots, etc. Had to report it. She was fired that day and were given a new account rep. It had to scrub it off my computer. We hadn't sent it out to our users yet. Story 37. Not in HR, but once had a woman who confided in her supervisor that she believed I was a demon sent to torture her. Apparently, one time she was in the woman's bathroom and believed that someone was on the other side of the wall in the men's bathroom flushing all of the toilets to torment her. When she came out of the bathroom, I apparently just so happened to be coming out of the men's bathroom. She reported all of this to HR. They obviously didn't take her seriously. She kept reporting me, so they told her to use the bathroom on a different floor. A few weeks later, apparently, she's on the first floor using the cafeteria bathroom, and she claims it happens again, so she went into the men's bathroom looking for me. Mind you, she freely told all of this to HR, and HR didn't warn me that this crazy lady that sat a few feet behind my cubicle thought I was a demon. Her supervisor eventually told me, so she got in trouble for telling HR she went into the bathroom looking for me, but she didn't get fired. She then cornered another one of our co-workers on an elevator and got in her face, menacingly told her, "I know all of you have been talking about me." That was strike two, I guess, but she still didn't get fired. Her final straw was when an outside contractor who had a desk on our floor coughed and she yelled out, "Is that how you sound when your doctor checks your prostate?" Across an office full of people. The moral of the story here is HR didn't care about my safety, but they damn sure weren't going to let her offend an outside contractor. Story 38, super small company. It guy at risk of losing his job offloaded all server info to his personal server to hold it hostage. Still was fired, and company didn't realize this tech transfer had happened until after. Story 39. At my husband's work at a high-security data center, this one guy got fired because he downloaded this shady VPN to bypass the site's firewalls and stuff to download Roblox on the work computer. The security team caught a bug that was minutes away from compromising money and data. He was like almost 40 years old. Imagine being a grown-ass man losing your job over Roblox. Story 40. Retail. Manager drove a new hire home after a closing shift. I think the new hire was a family friend, but he was maybe 19. She stopped by a bowling alley and got a few drinks. Proceeded to start a fight, which her employee had to step in and de-escalate. Employee then drove the manager home, but didn't want to steal her car, so he slept on the couch. Manager's boyfriend shows up at 5 a.m. and questions the employee. The boyfriend then makes the employee get in the car and run an errand. Thankfully, the errand was just taking the boyfriend's daughter to school. After a few hours, the employee gets dropped back off at the manager's house where she rushes to get ready for work. She drives the employee to work, has him clock in, though he wasn't scheduled, where he works for 45 minutes, clocks out, and leaves. I catch wind of this, conduct the interview with the employee, get every detail before I call the manager and ask, "Can you tell me why you had employee clock in for 45 minutes when he wasn't scheduled to work?" Technically, she quit, but I remember my manager saying, "You should turn this into a screenplay." Story 41. Math professor at my university got caught looking at adult film in the math lab. Apparently, part of his duties was to man it, but students rarely came during the hours he was there. A female student saw him with his junk out and got the cops. You see, it was a closed door, but a closed door with a window in the door. Yes, he had an office. Yes, it had a lock. And no, it didn't have a window. No one could see the screen. Everyone assumed it was adult women. He was allowed to leave with the laptop, so I suppose they'll never know. Story 42. He wasn't fired, but back in the day when Wi-Fi wasn't so easily available, and you had to PN when you traveled to get data. This guy clocked up thousands of dollars while he was away for work. He had been gambling online and watching adult film on his work laptop and using the company TPN to get internet access. He had to pay back months' worth of money when they tracked his usage back and saw how many big bills he'd racked up. The most recent one had reached $1,000, which triggered the alarm. I guess he figured he was getting away with it and got braver. The guy's wife had recently left him for his habits, and he was paying child support and gambling, so he was broke and then ended up paying back our employer thousands of dollars. He admitted he'd watched entire adult movies and spent hours per day on gambling sites, hence the high usage. I forget what the technology was called exactly, but he had a little device that connected somehow from the laptop to the internet, and it cost money to use. Story 43. Dude came into work absolutely loaded, disappeared at our first 15 minutes break, came back 20 minutes late. This guy generally sagged his pants a bit. I saw him lean over, and it was clear his cronies were missing. Turns out he crapped himself. He was on substances. And tried to flush his underwear down the toilet. He left a poop-stained sock on the bathroom floor. He also happened to leave his fully loaded substances rig on the bathroom shelf. That workplace was a nightmare, Elmau. Story 44. I had a temp laborer come from an agency to help with a changeover once. He showed up reeking of substances and kept asking if he could go down to the street and get a pop. So I figured he was dealing while he was on our clock. Temp laborers are always useless, and I had better things to do than police one guy, so I just ignored him. But when my shift ended, one of my coworkers said he was making her uncomfortable, and she didn't want me to leave her to deal with him. I told the guy, "You gotta leave. I'm gonna sign your paper so you can get paid for the shift, but just go." And he refused. I was like, "Huh?" He says, "No, I'm gonna stay." I'm like, "Okay, I'm offering to pay you to leave, but if you don't leave, I'm gonna call the cops." He's like, "Whatever, do it." So I very unhappily call the cops and sit down to wait for them before I can leave myself. But it was almost worth it to see the interaction. I'm like, yeah, this guy is dealing substances out of his backpack and making my colleagues uncomfortable. Now he's refusing to leave the building. The cop is like, "Sir, can I look in your bag?" The guy is like, "Sure." Then the cop immediately finds his big bag of substances and arrests him. It still kind of bothers me to this day, WTF, that guy was thinking. Story 45, work in a mill. We've got these big buildings to store raw wood material in. Early on, during commissioning, a guy was doing fire watch in one. In full view of the cameras, he decides to take a piss and gets witnessed by a bunch of the higher-ups and promptly canned. He had a radio and could have called for someone to cover easily. Idiot. Story 46. Worked in HR admin a lifetime ago. Drinking culture among the sales team, pharma bunnies, and gym bros. Lots of people hooked up at sales meetings, not all single. But one national meeting, the VP of HR, young woman, walked in on the VP of sales, 60-something man, ducking one of the younger reps in an elevator. He was married. She was his report. He had been gunning for her for a director position. They were both on a lot of substances. He invited the HR VP to join. She had to get hotel security and the police involved because the hotel had kids staying there. Though thankfully, this was at like 3 a.m. We had an interim VP for a while, and the bars started capping everyone at 2 drinks on the company. 4 total. Story 47. This was over 20 years ago in a corporate office. But there was one manager who was known for being a creep. There were rumors about him ranging from harassment to having affairs. Well, we had an intern from a local high school. She was 17, about to turn 18 in her senior year. Well, he immediately took a liking to her, and one day he took her into one of the small conference rooms that didn't have a window, and everyone in the office heard a very loud scream. A guy was walking by, immediately burst open the door to see the manager with his junk out and immediately trying to put it back in his pants. The guy immediately got the girl out of the office, and all hell broke loose. But in the end, he was arrested, fired, and got jail. Story 48. Well, corporate HR didn't let me fire him, but this was wild. This happened in the first 3 months at a new job, being a first-time manager. I had onboarded a new employee that another manager had hired. He was to work in my store. Him and I had been texting over a couple of scheduling and employee housing things, NBD. He shows up for his first day with his girlfriend in tow. They started a verbal altercation outside my store, in the courtyard of a very busy 5-star luxury hotel. A few days later, she shows up in the parking lot, screaming at him, threatening him. I called security and locked myself in my store. I had started documenting things and submitting it to HR. A few days later, at 2:30 a.m., my phone starts blowing up. His girlfriend took my number out of his phone and started accusing me of harassing him, trying to come on to him, and all sorts of wild things. HR still didn't let me fire him because it was his GF, not him. I was able to transfer him to a male manager's store and told both of them that if they ever contacted me again, I'd be filing a police report. It resolved itself at that point. Story 49. I think I win this one. I used to work at a medical spa, and we hired a new receptionist who would also begin helping out as our medical photographer. So he would just take some before and after pictures of the patients and upload them into our database. Well, later on down the road, we hire a young girl, 16 years old, super innocent, sheltered kid. This will be important later. The new young girl is hired for the summer to help out with sorting through all the medical photos because we were moving to a new system. Well, she had accidentally deleted something and went into the trash bin to restore it and got blasted with tons of adult videos and images. She didn't even know what she was looking at first. Just horrible. When I came in the next day, as the front office manager, I had to view the videos to identify if it was in fact the person we thought it was in the videos. The male receptionist we had hired had been working there a few years at this point, and he decided to get drunk, invite a bunch of his friends to his place of work at 2 a.m., and film adult videos on his professional work camera. They were wearing leather, there were sex toys, they were doing the most insane things you could imagine. He actually came into work the next day and had to sit down in the office and be confronted with the videos before he was asked to leave. Strangest day of my life. Story 50. New hire at my first corporate job came for his first day, and we decided to have a team lunch to welcome him. He insisted he couldn't make it and had an appointment over lunch. When it was an hour after lunch ended and there was no sign of him, someone let us know he was stumbling down the road blackout drunk after heading to a bar during lunch. This was in a small town, so it was easy for the info to get back to us. At the time, I was a secret alcoholic, but obviously not at that level. But that crap freaked me out because I saw where I would end up one day if I didn't get my crap together. Just past 6 years of sobriety. So maybe it helped me in some weird way. Story 51. A guy I almost worked with was going through onboarding training. The kid was the son of the CFO. There was a cute 20-years-old blonde in the class, and during a lunch break, he goes up to her and says, "Why don't you just do BJ now? We both know it's going to happen anyway." He got walked out by his dad 20 minutes later. Story 52. I'm not in HR, but my female supervisor was fired for assaulting me. Took advantage of me while we were all drunk at a staff party and forced me into her while I was intoxicated and passed out. Story 53. Early 2000. Police showed up to arrest a 30-year-old coworker for having repeatedly abused a girl. They tracked him down because he met her in an early chat room while using a work computer. We are all Americans and working in UK. Same job, but different military contractors. He was put on immediate suspension from work, and he had his passport taken by the police. He later tried to pass when he drove his car off a cliff, but was so drunk he survived with little injury. Somehow, he was able to get to the embassy, and they flew him back home. Due to the nature of our job, they saw it as more important to get him off UK soil than to face trial and become a news story. The US refused to send him back for trial, and somehow he kept his job with the military contractors he worked for. To this day, I don't know how he pulled that off. Well, he was sent to a remote location in East Asia where he ended up doing same to another girl. This time, the locals handled it the local way. He passed away in agony. Story 54. A senior engineer printed a whole stack of adult pics to the network printer in the admin pool area when he was working over the weekend. We called the event the Monday Surprise. Story 55. Not an HR person here, but witnessed this happen in real time at all stages of the process. This happened probably 20 years ago. Two female co-workers, I will call them Jane and Tammy, were chatting about how Jane is throwing a bachelorette party. She wants to do something fun and a bit naughty for favors. Tammy says she makes custom chocolates as a side business. They both decide chocolate junk would be super fun for the party. About a week later, Tammy has procured various risque candy molds and has painstakingly produced samples for Jane to choose from. Knowing the office is really not appropriate to bring these confections, she smartly takes photographs and emails them to herself at work. Tammy forwards the email to Jane. Jane recognizes these are inappropriate for work email and emails them to her own external private account. Cut to 2 weeks later when they are individually called in and fired for using corporate resources to distribute adult images. These are women who had over 15 and 20 years with the company, did their jobs very well, and were well liked, and both lost their jobs over chocolate junk. Our boss was pissed over the whole thing and was told this came from way above her head and there was nothing she could do about it. A serious what the heck moment. Story 56. Non-HR person here. I work in a union, so you know there's got to be a good reason for firing someone. Guy took voyeur videos from tanning salons in the surrounding counties and used his work laptop to transfer these videos from one external device to another. Story 57. A manager called the police on an employee refusing to leave their shift, and the police arrived and arrested manager for being hammered. She blew a .22. Story 58. We had a small branch office where we'd hired a new salesperson. The place we rented was an office with a reception area and 2 offices in a small commercial building. In a few months, it went from being very profitable to not being able to make rent. Calls were being unanswered and sales dropped off to near nothing. I asked to transfer to that location and become the manager with the promise that I'd bring it back to profit, which I soon did. Shortly after arriving, I started to know the neighbors on our floor, all small companies and professionals. They soon told me about the disturbing traffic to the office and some of the sounds overheard before I'd arrived. Seems this new salesman had quite a thing for professional women and would have them over during the workday. After looking in his desk, I found many business cards for escorts and few for clients. It also seemed the company footed the bill in the form of fake expense claims. I had to fire him, and in the process, he felt compelled to tell me the couch in the front office is actually a fold-out bed. I also got rid of the couch without opening it. Story 59. Not HR, but a manager was playing music on a Bluetooth speaker and then went into the bathroom and started watching adult film, and there was plenty of people who heard it. So lost a $100,000 a year job because he was dumb enough not to remove the Bluetooth and also want to watch adult film at work, but no one would have known he watched adult film if he disconnected Bluetooth. Story 60. I'm not in HR, but I've seen a lot of ducked up things go down over the years. At one company I worked for in the late 90s, these 2 incidents both happened on my shift. A guy got caught printing CP at work. A supervisor was fired because he tried to abuse a woman when she came in for an interview. Rumor has it he was also high on med at the time. Story 61. I worked HR at a small government contracting firm. An employee of ours was terminated due to failing to meet the contract obligations of his position. The real reason was crap he did while he was assigned to the FBI NICS criminal background check project. For those that don't know, this is the national system that checks records on persons who may be disqualified from receiving firearms. So when you purchase a firearm, you fill out an ATF form 4473. The gun store sends your info to NICS, then they get an approval. Denial back before the transaction is finalized or suspended. This dumb mother ducker was just submitting approval statuses willy-nilly. Potentially, individuals who should not have been sold firearms were sold them predicated on negligent approvals. The gun stores were not at fault, as Nike's approvals should be accepted with impunity. Homie was court-martialed, dishonorably discharged from the Navy, had federal charges levied against him, and was sentenced to some prison time in Club Fed. If you are going to duck around at work, my advice is not to do it while employed by the federal government, and especially not while in the employ of the premier U.S. investigative agency. Story 62. I was just a co-worker, not HR, in no particular order. First week in, open plan office, he's quietly taking on the work landline. What was he doing? In work time, on a radio dating show. Then, turns to a colleague, still within first couple of weeks. Colleague expects a, how do you do this? Or, what system does that? What did he ask? I just wanted to know, which girls here are single? He is sent out with a middle-aged female colleague to client meetings. On London Underground says loudly to her about woman opposite, she's attractive, don't you think she's attractive? They arrive at the client offices, said woman is receptionist. Same day, they take a client to lunch. He says, order whatever you like. The company credit card has a £10,000 sterling limit, waving the card about. Few months in, things escalate. He touches a random girl's hair inappropriately. He gets sacked. Not over, though. Few weeks later, he returns to the office, vaults the turnstiles, runs up 3 flights of stairs into HR offices. When asked, what the heck you doing? He says, I just wanted to leave this letter. He scared me, I'm male. Story 63. Had a former coworker that had an unusual anger management solution. Whenever he would get in a serious disagreement or argument with a coworker, he would write their name on a large caliber bullet and display it on his desk. Although management had been asked to address him, they continually ignored him and blew off concerns. He had quite a row going before he eventually began writing names of management. It was then when management took notice and ended up terminating him. Story 64. Not HR, but I used to work at a retail store in high school, and my lead was a 50-year-old man who seemed like a nice enough guy, was a substitute teacher, and had a wildlife photography business on the side. Well, one day he was talking to one of the girls working, and she asked him what he did that weekend, and he proceeded to show her a picture of him having sex with a former coworker. He was promptly fired. Story 65. I had an employee who not only didn't understand personal space issues with my female employees, but he would touch them. I wasn't made aware until 2 female employees I trusted walked into my office and shut the door. With one of them, he had administered an unwelcome back rub. The other he had grabbed around the waist. I called him to my office, made him apologize, and then told him that the next infraction would result in his immediate dismissal. And I said it in front of the other employees. The next Tuesday in staff meeting, he put his hand in the small of another female employee's back. Seeing her stiffen, I fired him in front of everyone. Story 66. Parts of the front office sleeping with other parts of the front office, including HR. My favorite quote from the whole ordeal, I don't know who she was hired for sleeping with, but I know who she was fired for sleeping with. They fired the guy too, which is probably better than paying off the woman and keeping the guy like they had done previously. I was not surprised when that place went out of business. Story 67. Office organized a year-end pool party. Naturally, some women were a little body conscious and not all came in swimsuits, which was fine, as they stood around enjoy canapes and cocktails. But there was this one shy but well-endowed girl who turned up with a mermaid tail swimsuit. One stupid guy kept taking photos of her, which made her feel uncomfortable. To make matters worse, he immediately posted them to social media. She was upset and quickly left a pool to change into regular clothes. Upon returning, she pled to the guy to delete the images he had uploaded. This fella refused, saying there's nothing wrong, you're not exposing anything. He then grabbed her mermaid tail swimsuit, put it on, and jumped into the pool, as if to show her there's nothing to be embarrassed about. She filed a harassment complaint later, and he was history. Story 68. I'm not in HR, but my friend told me about a guy at her job who got fired for constantly taking naps in the supply closet. They gave him warnings, but he kept sneaking off for breaks until they eventually let him go. Definitely one of those seriously moments. Story 69. Not HR, but this happened about 10 years ago. A manager was taking an employee unnecessarily on business trips. She was the only one that wasn't a manager and had no business justification for being there. Apparently, this went on for several years. It was so they could have their affair. One day, he rented a car, bought a disguise, a wig, and not sure what else. We had several offices within about a mile radius over several buildings. Security did an audit, and he badged in several buildings that morning to try and hide his tracks. He went to the daycare where the husband was dropping the kids off and hit the husband, and he passed away. The security footage from the daycare proved it was him, despite the wig. She was charged too, but got off because it appears the man acted on his own. Story 70. I'm not in HR, but a lady was fired for lying about having breast cancer. Asked to be fully remote to avoid getting sick, but didn't work at all. Shows the incompetence of management not confirming her work. She forged doctor's notes. She even cut her hair when she was doing chemo to make it believable. So twisted. Our HR found out because they called the doctor's office to just get an updated note, and they were told she's not a patient there. HR workers have read it. What's the worst way you've seen an employee screwed over by the company? Story 1. I worked for an oil company and lived through mass redundancies when the oil went belly up. They sent out a list of which positions were being made redundant, with numbers for how many people currently held that role and how many they were cutting it to. So if it said buyers, current, 4, consultation, 3, you knew that if you were a buyer, you'd be under scrutiny and 25% of your team would be gone soon. I sat at my desk and opened the email, looked for my position, no redundancy for me. The girl next to me opened hers and saw her position, current, 1, consultation, 0. That's how she learned she'd lost her job. Story 2. Not in HR, but I can think of 2 examples. There was a fire drill, and upon returning, it was discovered that not everybody returned. Apparently, it was a literal fire drill where some people were told that they had been let go, and this was their way of having them leave. The other example is my dad, who had been with a huge multinational company that tried to fire him a week or so before his 30-year work anniversary. Fortunately for him, the manager forgot to give him the necessary paperwork on time, and he was fired, but made it to the 30-year mark, which has extremely heavy implications on pension and retirement. Story 3. In 2008, my company had huge riff of 100 or so people. The day it happened was just terrible. I walked into a conference room and found the HR guy crying in the dark. 30 days later, they let him go. Story 4. I'm just an IT guy, so I don't always know the whole story, but it feels bad locking someone's account on their PC and having them find out that way. Then, of course, moments later, an HR person shows up in their office. Story 5. We had rifts back in 08. They started in February in the Midwest. One gal was escorted out of the secure area, told she was gone and to leave the building. She was okay with being rifed, however. It's February in the Midwest, and it's cold outside. All her stuff was inside the secure area, and they wouldn't allow her to back in. They wouldn't get her stuff for her. She had to stand out in 20 degrees weather until someone she knew would call a buddy to get her hat, coat, purse, car keys. Story 6. Obligatory not an HR worker, but my college roommate was a temp in an HR office for college credit. She came home one night absolutely disheveled. Makeup smeared, heels in hand, just rough. In a nutshell, her supervisor made her participate in firing a woman for creating a hostile work environment. Seems cut and dry, right? Turns out the hostility was directed at a man the woman accused of abuse her daughter. The woman obviously went bat-crap crazy, crying, begging to keep her job, the works. Told my roommate the entire story about how she dated the guy for years. Thought he was great, but now her 13-year-old daughter had some kind of stud that the guy had given to both of them. Naturally, the mom threatened to hit the guy. The HR supervisor wasn't having it, had security escort the woman out. My roommate asked the supervisor if she thought the mom was telling the truth. The supervisor, cold as ice. Probably. We hire some really suspicious people. She shouldn't have left her daughter alone. That broke something in my roommate, and she dropped her business program 3 years in. I think she graduated with a degree in biology or something 2 years later. Story 7. Not HR, but I was forced out of a job in a crafty way and want to share. I moved to another state and got a job at an alternative school for kids who had been kicked out of public school for emotional and behavioral issues. The company spent a few hundred hours training me, and I learned a lot more on the job. It was difficult at times, but I enjoyed the work and the people I worked with. After a few months, I felt comfortable in my role. Then, for some reason still unknown to me, the bosses wanted me gone. I was called into a meeting with 2 supervisors who said that we were now overstaffed. Lie, we had 3 vacancies. And that I had an exciting opportunity to move to another program. They wanted to move me to our sister program where you work one-on-one in a public school, which can suck if you have a tough kid. And in that program, they wanted me to be a floater, so I could get a text at 5 a.m. telling me I had to go to a school an hour away to work with an emotionally unstable kid I've never met before. So I thought about it the next day and told my supervisor that I wanted to stay where I was, but that I would be flexible and go to the other program for a few months if they needed me there, or be a permanent one-on-one with a kid. Just not a permanent floater. I didn't hear anything for a week and then get called into a meeting with both supervisors and the head director. The head director says that the other program would be better for my professional development. Bullcrap. And then asks me to tell her 3 of my professional goals that I'm working on, clearly trying to catch me off guard. I make up something and then tell her my reasons for wanting to stay. I don't hear anything for a couple weeks, but the bosses are crafty and begin sending me emails for any mistakes I make that could easily have been said in person. For example, another staff and I were dealing with an escalated kid who had already bit me, and I was tapping my foot while watching him. The director came up behind me, loudly said, "You need to stop doing that in front of the kid." Then she had one of my supervisors write me an email the next day telling me I had to be conscious of tapping my foot or drumming my fingers. which is true but doesn't require an email. Then, I get called into another meeting with the director and two supervisors, who tell me that I am getting moved to the other program. I gave my 2 weeks notice on the spot, which made my coworkers think I was a badass, but didn't help the fact that I needed a new job. My director then still forced me to go to the other program for my last 2 weeks. So I didn't get the goodbye ceremony or anything at the alternative school and could do very little at the other program since they knew I wouldn't be there long. I ended up getting a job at a preschool with a much better boss, but it still frustrates me to think about the whole experience. Story 8. I had a friend years ago and she worked security First Union Bank's, Main at campus. She told me the way they let people go is they would come to badge in through the door and their card would not work. Out came HR and security where they would escort the person to their desk to get their things and then walked right out the door. She told me about 3 weeks after this started, one Saturday night around 5 p.m., their ATM system crashed and took them about all night to recover. She told me she thinks someone left them a going-away gift. Story 9. I was the screwed-over employee here. I'm colorblind. My boss gave me a work task that was color-coded in a way that I couldn't see, based on color coding of spreadsheet cells, where each color had a specific meaning, and I couldn't distinguish all of them. When I told my boss about this, she decided to write me up for it, under the assumption I was lying to get out of work. I went straight to HR with a copy of the write-up. The rep told me that there was exactly one way I could get the write-up off my record. I could use our tuition reimbursement program to go take a remedial art class at the local community college, so that you can finally learn your colors, she said. That's when I found out that color blindness isn't protected under the ADA. This was right about the same time that I stayed late one day to cover for a coworker who ran out of insulin in her pump. I stayed about 45 minutes while she went home, got her refill, and came back. The next day, I was written up for the unauthorized overtime. Another coworker went into the same HR rep to see if she could put her son on her insurance. She was told that no, she couldn't do that since her son lived in Hawaii, and Hawaii isn't part of the United States. I decided about that time it just wasn't worth staying at that company. Story 10. I worked almost 100 % on one of the major projects at my company. It was one of only a couple whales that was keeping the lights on. This was during the major oil crash around 2014 or so. The project manager booked a long vacation way in advance, and the client decided at the last minute that all the work needed to be revisited, not by our fault, just compliance with a new regulatory procedure. This was actually great news because it gave a lot of people work to do, which was pleasantly surprising news when layoffs are happening weekly, so we could not say no. A more senior coworker stepped up and took over. Everything went great, and we got the deadline on time, but it took a lot of overtime on their part. They really came through. I and other coworkers mentioned them by name during performance reviews to commend them. They were laid off a couple weeks later. It was not announced. They stopped informing the staff of layoffs because apparently it was hurting morale. I was already planning on leaving to go to grad school, but I could have changed my mind until that point. I pretty just mentally checked out, ignored everyone, and counted down the days until I left. Just remember that if you work for a huge company, you owe them absolutely nothing beyond your scheduled hours. The people deciding your fate could be entire tiers above whatever low-level manager you answer to, and you will probably never see their face or even know their name. You may get dropped on an impulse to make their spreadsheet numbers look better for their next meeting. Story 11. Sears Canada, going through bankruptcy. Many employees were laid off with no severance while the executives were getting six-figure bonuses. Those bonuses could have covered many employees' severance. Story 12. Allow me to post a happy story involving layoffs and HR. But first, a little background. Where I live, employers could give out temporary contracts for a total of 3 years. After that, they had to let you go or offer you a permanent contract. Work somewhere for 3 years in a single second. It's permanent contract. This girl was on her 3rd year, with all signs pointing towards a permanent contract. Her evaluations were through the roof. She was one of the more productive workers in the department. Good rapport with customers. Coworkers liked her, and she loved working there. It should have been a done deal. However, 2 months before she hits 3 years, the company announces a downsizing. As part of this downsizing, all temporary workers will not have their contracts renewed or made permanent. Department head tries to argue with HR, citing everything I mentioned above, but they can't do anything. Downsizing like this is part of labor law as well as the CBA, and they literally cannot make exceptions. But they can offer her transition help, i.e., helping her find a new job. Girl doesn't want to do, but is convinced by the department head to in anyway. So she brings her CV and the proof of all the training she's had and meets up with the HR rep. HR rep stops at one of her internships she did right before she came to her current job, asks her a lot of questions about it. Then he asks her a lot of questions about how long she's been working at the company. Then he steps out for a good 10 minutes before returning with the head of the HR department. They ask her again to confirm her employment history, It turns out the company she interned at was taken over roughly a year before by the company she now worked for. Also, internships count as work experience, and when the takeover was finalized, the payroll was transferred on a one-to-one basis, including past experience. So officially, her employment with our company was not 2 years, 11 months, but 3 years, 2 months. As a result, her previous temporary contract was now permanent by law, and she wasn't laid off. Story 13. You know what's ducked? Getting walked out by security in the middle of your shift because you got fired over something small, petty, and unimportant. Let us finish our goddamn shift. Just be like, hey, drop by HR after work. Maybe give us a phone call. We already showed up for work. Let's get paid for that last day instead of driving for nothing. Give us the ability to act with dignity and honor. You strip that. What's left? It's overly dramatic and silly as duck to walk people out with the corporate cop treating them like a criminal. Yeah, I know some people explode or do something crafty when they get fired. But seriously, grow a pair of balls and face it as a fact of life that maybe 1 in 1,000 employees will have a crap storm. No need to treat the other 999 like common criminals. Even if people are just peacefully laid off, they can still get walked out like criminals who need a security escort because they've done some bad crap. Would you like a pair of handcuffs and a billy club to complete the ensemble? If you treat people that crafty, they aren't going to respect the company. Think about that. What do people do when they don't respect the company? They don't work as hard, do they? They don't stick around either. They talk. Now, everybody thinks the job is crap. Your own policies are self-defeating. Treat people with a little dignity. Source, worked for HP, subcontracted by Adecco, aka Gestapo. Saw some stupid crap in my day. Once a guy was fired for taking a Kleenex from a cubicle to blow his nose. Somebody complained to HR, so HR just fired one of the temp workers for it. Fired Kleenex. What is this? Dubai? Sharia law? Corporate behavior is ducked, and 99% of it is because people who work HR are mother duckers with no soul or capacity to understand or even work out a situation. HR is supposed to be problem solvers, but they don't solve problems. They are the problem most of the time. Story 14. I used to work in a warehouse, and one time an employee got seriously injured. His arm and leg were seriously ducked up. This guy worked out a lot, so management pulled him into the office and began to speak to him. So you hurt your arm at the gym and now want to blame us? A pallet of heavy things literally tumbled over near him. If he didn't move right away, he could have easily gotten crushed. Management thought it was a scam. Do you know what insurance fraud is? Tell us the truth. We know everything. You can't lie to us. The guy was stunned. He wanted to use his health insurance, but the management wasn't hearing it. This continued for some time, a few hours at least. I guess someone overheard because 3 guys from the union showed up pissed. Really pissed. There was screaming, shouting, and then one mentioned that perhaps we should get the Department of Labor and the insurance company involved. I guess that was enough to convince him. He let the employee use his insurance, and things went on for a while. Apparently, this guy had a habit of doing this to everyone who was injured. Injury happens. A day later, etc. He literally accused someone of working with a broken arm for 2 weeks before going to the hospital. I think someone either reported him or the union stepped in because he's disappeared. Story 15. I worked for a company on contract, in HR if you believe it. It was a crappy company, so 6 weeks before the contract ended, I went to the boss and said that I was going to leave at the end of my contract. For the next 6 weeks, I was person non grata in the HR department. I was removed from their group email list. I wasn't told about meetings. They went on 2-day training outside the office, and I wasn't told. I arrived at work to an empty HR department for 2 days, etc. On my last day, I was saying goodbye to people around the office, and my boss comes down and demands that I come to a meeting and walks away. After 6 weeks of basically no contact, I was wondering why. Someone in another department said that they had planned a goodbye party for me. They treated me like crap for 6 weeks and then bought a gift, cake, balloons, etc. I said, damn, that snuck up to my desk, got my coat, left the building, and drove away. Apparently, they sat there for an hour paging me throughout the building before they realized that I had left. Good thing was, I didn't need them for a reference as a friend of mine owned his own company and gave me one saying I had worked there for the year. Story 16. A colleague of mine was flown from his office in the field to headquarters under the pretense of a leadership meeting and fired immediately once he arrived. He was on a plane back home 2 hours later. The boss didn't feel like traveling. Story 17. One founder sells the company to a big corporation, makes a huge profit, and ducks off to the tropics. 2. New management starts to fire people over 100 the first 6 months. 3. New management then makes the place so miserable, people start losing it and quitting the second 6 months. 4. Place gets so bad, employees threaten to unionize. Company says if they do, all jobs will be terminated and services exported to India. Worst crap I've ever seen. Damn big corporations. Story 18. Not HR, but my favorite HR story over the years. I've been in it for over 20 years. and this was one of my earlier experiences. From start to finish, this story took place over 4 years. When I got hired, it was about 250 employees across 4 states. I got hired on for a support position. 2 days later, one of 2 internal staff left. Got asked to fill that position. Renegotiated my pay to about 1.5x my prior pay rate, but salaried. Worked for about another year when my boss left. They hired a replacement with me having to train her. She lasted 2 weeks before she left. They looked for about 2 months before I was given the position, with another raise to 2x my original pay rate, reporting to the CEO. For the it folk, this was in the era when you could still be a one-man show for it. Fast forward another year or so, I was supporting a project that was making a metric crap ton of cash. The company decided it'd be better if I moved to that project full-time and for them to bring in a replacement for me. They were making money hand over fist. I basically made the company what they paid me yearly in 1 week. Hadn't had a raise for about a year at this point. End of year review comes around and no raise. Turns out the CEO I reported to was pissed my pay had climbed so much in a relatively short time, regardless of my role. So still having full access to everything as a backup for my replacement, I started looking around. The directories were pretty while I realized that this wasn't the proper way to go about it. Every single damn WW2 employee got a raise. I didn't open the actual paperwork. The directory structure showed it all. I had gone from an internal cost to making them money. Why the heck didn't I get at least a cost of living raise? I get it to a coworker that I trusted, which came back to bite me. About a month later, I got the call to sit down with the CEO and HR. CEO sits me down with HR and asks me if it's true. I own up and explain that I was pretty pissed that I went from being a cost to making them a gang of cash and was wondering why I didn't get a raise. His response? I didn't get a raise this year. My response was Feb 01 raise folder. His eyes immediately hit the desk. I can still hear the smack of the HR girl's hand hitting her mouth to stifle the laugh. Story 19. Not HR, but there was this guy who came to work for us about a year ago. This is hard manual labor, and the guy had quit slinging substances on the street to come make an honest living to support his family. He was having trouble dealing with it at first, but he adjusted and ended up being one of the hardest workers on the floor, always working those 12-hour shifts, staying busy that whole time. Anyway, he works with us for a good long while before his 19-year-old daughter passed suddenly in her sleep. He, of course, gets a few days off. They probably would have given him more time, but he really couldn't afford to miss any work. Dude held it together so damn well while he was at work, man. You could tell for sure he was going through some crap, but he stayed busy still. Well, that next week I guess he decided he needed a little more time off, but he didn't call out and stayed home for 2 days. After returning from that 2 days, he was immediately escorted out of the building and fired. Story 20. Not HR. Happened to me. Went in for end-of-year review and was ambushed by HR VP, company president, and 2 VPs, all of whom proceeded to tell me in great detail for about an hour how much I sucked and how much all my coworkers thought I sucked. They had stories from each colleague, small company, that claimed happened over the course of the year. I was never informed about any of them, nor given a chance to defend myself. Was absolutely humiliating, and I sat there crying through it. Was told to go home for the day. Come back tomorrow, and at some point over the next couple of weeks, I would be told my last day. I left, called my parents crying, decided to clean myself up, and returned to the office an hour later like nothing had happened. I kept showing up day and after day while reaching out to my professional network and also slowly cleaning our office and cleaning up files for the entire month of January. HR finally pulled me into office early February and said, "Last day, leave and make arrangements to come back to clean out office, clean up files, and turn in key." My response left them dumbstruck. "Office is cleaned out, all files uploaded to shared drive, and I'll give you a flash drive. Here's my key." Then I skipped out of the office, spent the rest of the week playing tourist at museums, then got busy on a new career and life that continues to be more amazing than I ever thought possible. Story 21. My Fortune 500 company was going through downsizing years back. Everyone knew their turn could be coming, so it wasn't the best of environments. One woman who had been with the company for 20 years was applying for jobs just to see what was out there, but really wanted to stay with current company. She ended up getting an offer elsewhere. So she approached our manager at the time and told him the situation and asked for advice. Boss basically told her nothing is on the horizon, but do what is best for her. So she turns her notice in. The very next day, Riffs announced, entire department being let go, except the manager. Everyone gets a severance package, except for Lady, who put notice in the day prior. She lost 40 weeks of pay, 2 per year worked. Boss knew the Riffs were coming. He could have advised her to wait a day in a roundabout way. Damn you, Derek. On the bright side, she had a new job right away, while the rest of us took some time off and competed for the same open jobs in the area. Story 22. Not HR, but I think the way I was fired by my last company was pretty crafty. I worked in marketing for a small company. The company was having problems, and there were crazy internal power struggles, which led to my firing. Basically, crap rolls downhill. Boss wasn't meeting sales goals because the salespeople they hired and were buddies with couldn't sell water to someone dying of thirst and needed someone to blame. I went to the Christmas party and had the next 2 days off. The second day I had off, I got a generic email saying my services were no longer needed. The other 2 people in my department got the same email. Turns out everyone else at the party, about 20 people, and knew me, and one of the other people, my supervisor, were going to get fired. The company's HR person, real professional, had told a couple people we were going to get fired, and word spread. The third person who got fired was lined up to get my supervisor's job, but got drunk at the party and told the boss it was a mistake to fire us, so she ended up getting fired too. Looking back, not only was it crafty to fire us a week before Christmas, but also crafty to put us in a room of our coworkers who all knew we were about to get fired. Story 23. I wasn't in HR, but I was a manager of Target Canada and witnessed the cruelest thing ever while I was there. My department was the Starbucks, and Target had a policy that no expired food would donated, taken home, etc. Any breach of this would be considered stealing. Most of my employees were like 18 years old, and one of them in particular was a pretty bad apple. She convinced most of the team that they could get away with pulling extra food out of the freezer, letting it expire, and then taking it home. Target's system for monitoring this kind of thing was pretty crafty, and I had no way to count or keep track of what was being pulled or thrown. 6 out of 8 of the people on my team were involved in this, and they all got fired the moment that loss prevention finished their investigation. That left me with 2 employees who were not a part of the scheme at all. My store was the second busiest Starbucks within Target's across Canada, and myself and the 2 girls were absolutely drowning. They worked their asses off for me, up to 60 hours a week while I tried to frantically hire new people, and spoke directly with HR and my upper management about ensuring that the 2 girls I had were safe from being terminated. They assured me that they were. After almost a month, I got a new team. HR came to me and told me they'd be letting the other 2 girls go, and that if I spoke about it to them, they'd let me go too. They figured the girls knew what was going on with the others and chose not to say anything, leaving them just as bad as the rest. It literally killed me from the inside. I had to say nothing, knowing that these girls were working their asses off to help this company and to help me. 2 days later, they were escorted out like criminals with a termination left on their employment record. I needed my job, so I stood by, but I damn hated that company so much going forward. I'm glad it failed, even though I had put so much of myself into it. Story 24. I was working as an HR rep for a company. While I was there, one of the department managers was moved to a different location to take on different responsibilities, and this really upset his all-female team, Relevant, as they had all been working for him for a while and had grown close. When they brought in a new guy to replace him, the team immediately decided that they didn't like the new manager. The guy was fantastic at his job, and the team's output increased greatly, but they just didn't like him. Members of the team would come to me often to complain about things, but the complaints didn't hold any substance, things like hating his corny jokes, etc. I documented every complaint, but essentially told the employees that he wasn't doing anything wrong, and they would just have to learn to work with him. I left for a new job shortly afterwards, and when I checked in with my old boss to see how things were going, she told me that corporate had decided to get rid of this manager. The reason being that the team knew the company had a zero-tolerance policy on harassment, and figured that if enough of them told the same story, it would be his word against theirs. He would put his hands in his pockets when he walked around. Eventually, the team started using this. They started suggesting to corporate that he could easily pleasure himself with his hands in his pockets, and said that they felt harassed. The plan worked. The guy was suspended, investigated, and let go within the same week. Basically, investigations are only as good as the time that HR wants to put into them. It's usually a he said, she said situation. Story 25. Made an employee come in at 6:30 for the morning rush hour only to tell her to leave after 10 minutes because they were a bit overstaffed. At least give her 2 hours for her troubles. Story 26. Not an HR guy, but I've seen my former employer do some ducked-up crap to employees. One employee hurts themselves on the job, trips on a falls, hurts herself pretty badly, is off work for quite some time. And then the employer decides to retaliate by suddenly getting rid of her position. Seems to be a legal loophole there. She sues for getting hurt because of unsafe conditions. Then a year later, the company suddenly decides they need that particular position again and hires someone. I've seen confidential memos about trying to find a good way to let someone go who got cancer without trying to get sued for it. I found out that the employer was making secret profiles of their employees. Pros and cons of each employee: being married, pro, single, con, being healthy, pro, having poor health, con, skinny, pro, overweight, con, smoker, con, financially well off, Pro, paycheck to paycheck. Con. All kinds of stuff like that. Employees were just commodities to them. This particular employer shuts down every year for 4 months, and the longtime employees come back. Well, 1 year, management decided to tell all the employees that they would have to reapply for their positions again and to not expect to get paid their regular salary. It was just an excuse to get rid of people. Most employees took the hint and moved on. Pretty despicable if you ask me. We lost some quality workers too. They planned on keeping the employees they wanted at their regular pay, and then crafting on the employees they didn't care left by offering them minimum wage. I saw a memo of the CEO boasting to the board members about how he got rid of the thieves and thugs. Story 27. Not HR, but was attacked by a female subordinate, I am male, while taking a short break in my vehicle. She opened my car door, violently grabbed my arm, and pulled me out of my vehicle, after returning to work following medical leave related to the incident. I returned to find the employee still working for the company. To make it worse, our desks are 3 feet apart. The two of us confined to a room together. Let HR know this was unacceptable. Was told that they had dealt with the issue. They had discussed inappropriate touching in the workplace with her. I let them know that a police report had already been filled out and charges had been filed against the woman, but Oldcastle HR refused to budge. I requested to be transferred to a different site as there were several in the area. Request denied. Told them I refused to work in the same room as somebody who physically attacked me. Sorry, you have to. In the end, given 6 months' pay and shown the door after over 3 years' service. The other employee was let go in under a year due to her constant mistakes, rude interactions with our dealer network, and inability to effectively manage her workload. I feel to this day, had the genders been reversed, there would have been a 100% different outcome. Basically, even after the employee admitted to the attack and my medical leave, HR didn't want to admit the incident took place. Story 28. This was at a previous job before I started working in HR. It was a large company and restructuring. Layoffs were relatively common every couple of years. They would usually lay off a few people from the same department. So if someone got called into the manager's office and got laid off, everyone was nervously wondering how many there would be and if they would be spared. Well, when my day came, I was 3. 2 people got laid off before me. When I went into the office, my manager had been crying and was still having a really tough time. She said that she tried to change their minds and that they told her the decision was made. My wife, now, she was my GF at the time, worked there in a different department. She told me how it went down after I left. A couple of departments were getting hit really hard because they were outsourcing a lot of work to India. My boss ended up having to lay off her entire team. She was told that she would be joining another department, who was also going through layoffs that day. So, she was scrambling to cover the essential items from each of our work, and she was also trying to help cover some work in her new team. She was running all over the place trying to transition everything to India and make sure that all customer calls were getting answered. She finally got all products turned on overseas at about 6 p.m., then HR came into her office and laid her off, pretty ducked up. Story 29. First-hand witness because it was me. Worked at a biotech startup for a year, saved them tons on in-house development of assay reagents, and had nothing but positive feedback. One of my coworkers was let go due to budgetary concerns and was given a very generous severance. About a month later, my father passed away and I took a couple of days. When I come back, I'm asked to stay late for a few days. And then on a Tuesday, I'm told that I'm being furloughed until they get a grant approved, but would for sure be brought back on. Lost health insurance, no severance offered, and they had already canceled my ID badge and parking pass. Couldn't get back in to get my wallet and keys and whatnot, during which time my car was towed. Story 30. Obligatory, not in HR, but one of my best friends. We worked together in a call center. Place was awful. Well, she got really sick, life-threateningly sick. She was in the hospital for 9 weeks and then was on disability for a while. She was on FMLA and was keeping the company informed of all doctor's orders. She found out she lost her job when she went to fill a prescription and her insurance was denied. They didn't bother to tell her. They just canceled her insurance. I left shortly before they did that, and it was a good thing, because I would have flipped on HR had I been there. Story 31. Not HR, but I can certainly tell you how Amazon HR screwed me over pretty good. I have worked for the company twice. On the second occasion, years after the first, I filled out my application, W-2, etc. When it came time to get paid, they mailed my first check to the address I living the first time I worked for the company. Ex-wife gets the check in the mail, forges my signature, and cashes it. Amazon refused to reissue the check. I went round and round with HR for months about this. Corporate lawyers were pulled in. My personal lawyer stuck up for me at no charge, due to J-State law, where the check was cashed. I had no legal recourse to sue for my money back, as it was up to Wells Fargo to sue and press charges on my ex. Amazon stood by their claim that the check was cashed and I was paid. The entire time, they treated me like a criminal and made out like I was attempting to grift them. They offered to pay up if signed an affidavit stating that I had never received the check, but backed out on the day I was supposed to sign the documents because we don't have a notary at this location and Amazon isn't willing to pay for one. Story 32. Last year, contractor gets made full-time with benefits. Everyone in his team complains because he's annoyingly friendly and tries too hard with too little experience, they said. He gets terminated overnight, account locked out, comes into the office and can't log in, asks me, to assist and goes and makes a coffee. Talks to his colleagues about how his wife is having a baby and they're about to close on a house now that the job is secured as a permanent role. I check emails, see he was terminated overnight and locked out. He comes back and jokes about its system reliability, asks if it's sorted. I think he could tell something was up by my expression. I asked him to discuss it with his manager, who was late that day. He waited another 20 minutes, then had a meeting and was walked out. There's no easy way to terminate someone who loves their job, but this is the worst I've seen so far. The worst thing is, after a trial period, you need to go through a rather difficult process to fire someone here. Since he was only in the permanent role for 10 days or so, and his prior contract was over, he got nothing other than a letter, a meeting, annual leave accrued for the 10 days and days worked. No notice required. Story 33. Not HR, of course. At my second job out of college, working for a company that produces most of the parts that go into a thing, and those things are sold by other companies. But my company basically made every internal part of the thing those companies sold. I'm being vague intentionally because there aren't many companies in the space. Anyway, the office was a bunch of desks in a bullpen, open concept type office, and the director's office was down at the end. His door was usually closed, but when he wanted to see you, he would email you. So when somebody got called into his office, you saw them quietly stand up from their desk and walk into his office. Cue 15 minutes of everyone trying not to get caught staring at the door. So the guy who sat at a desk right in front of mine, but perpendicular to mine, came in bright-eyed, well-tanned, rejuvenated, and basically looking great after his week-and-a-half cruise vacation with the wife and kids. He stood up and walked into director's office, walked out with a box in hand, cleaned out his desk quietly while trying not to cry, with me watching him from literally 2 feet away. At 8:15 a.m. the Monday he got back from vacation, damn. Story 34. My dad worked in community relations for a big company for 35 years. He was one of 2 candidates for a manager position a few years back and should have gotten the job, but they gave it to this lady who then became my dad's boss. For years, she made his work life hell, always condescending, always rude. My dad had a performance review once, and since he always did wonderful work, and everyone else loved him, the only thing she found to get him out for was slouching at his desk, and he was at the office too much. The whole ordeal actually affected his mental health to a point that he had to take a leave of absence for 6 weeks and had his doctor sign some papers saying that his work environment was the direct cause of his current mental state and that he shouldn't be forced to work under this woman's management any longer. The company puts him back anyway. A few months later, they conveniently decide that my dad's job needs to be moved to an office in another state, and if he wants to remain employed, he can move to said state or be laid off just before he was eligible for retirement, pension, all that good stuff. Story 35. Target, afternoon on a Saturday, I go to punch in for electronic, and the machine doesn't take my team member ID after several tries. Get higher up shows up and gives me a condescending, "Come over here." I get let go 4 days after already putting in my 2-week notice, and they had already scheduled me for 2 weeks. Didn't even give me a check, just $800. Not even hundreds, but 20 singles and change. They really can't just call an employee or email them that they're being let go. Gotta go through all that BS. Story 36. Not in HR, but the way I realized I was let go was when I couldn't log into my computer. Had spent all day Thursday in good spirits, talking with my boss about upcoming projects, and discussing an exclusive holiday party for our top-level membership holders. Left my computer on at the end of the day because I was working on someone's account and wanted to start back up in the morning without rebooting the computer. Came in that morning. Went to wake up my unit and noticed that it's asking for my login. Weird. Maybe. Power went out overnight, I thought. Typed in my password and it was denied. Stood there super confused, and my boss walked swiftly towards my door and wouldn't look me in the eye while asking me to follow him into the conference room. This particular room had doors you can close for privacy, but also a camera, so I knew what was coming. The worst part is after 6 years of dutiful loyalty and asking countless times for help, training, direction as I was in a position of management and being told to Google YouTube videos, they couldn't even look me in the eye and tell me exactly why. Story 37. Not an HR worker, but last week 3 employees were fired in the company I work in. The lady in charge of terminating people was known in the company as Death, because when she called you in a room, crap was going down. She fired 2 people following our ridiculous protocol, which basically kicks people out and then someone else has to pick up their stuff from the desk and take it to them outside. We usually fire them first thing in the morning, so they don't waste a whole day of work for a company they no longer work for. After doing those 2 terminations, her boss called her in her room and fired her too. Story 38. My dad was basically forced into quitting a job a couple years ago. They brought in a new guy above him who claimed to be a literal mafia boss and pretty much acted accordingly. I don't know the details, but it was brutal and I saw how much it wore down my dad. He quit. A year later, they sell the company and invite him to a celebratory dinner. Except, obviously, everyone else there got their cut of the significant profits. And all he'd gotten was a minor gain from the small number of shares he'd had in it. He was staying in my booked university accommodation last night. The company was in my university town. And got so monumentally ducked up. We had to book an extra night because he couldn't move from bed in the morning and was still drunk and throwing up a solid 12 hours after leaving the dinner. Story 39. We had a company downsizing a few years ago, and the company was looking to find ways of getting rid of people without paying redundancy. Basically, find any possible misconduct issues and fire people. We had quite a few internet misuse cases, but one guy who had been at the company for 15 years was called into the office for running a gambling syndicate on company property. He was screwed over because this gambling syndicate he had run was a fantasy sports league that basically the whole company played from managers to junior staff. He was fired in a meeting by a number of managers that had all been playing the fantasy league every year. Also, I will point out he ran the league in his own time, so before and after he clocked in and during breaks. Story 40. I was not the HR for this company. Small tech company owned by an old guy and a young guy who prided himself on never doing dishes. He had a maid. They made an announcement that there was a party in our conference room and had everyone shuffle over. The party turned out to be a mass layoff of everyone in their final checks. Outsourced, it was inside shutting down all the computers and pulling power cables so no one could do any damage. The backstory: they went to buy the competition. The competition whipped out their checkbook and bought them on the spot. Story 41. My company eliminated the department of 4 people and 1 manager. The 2 lowest paid employees got reassigned, and the manager got reassigned as well. All 5 people had plenty of valuable skills that could be used elsewhere in company. Meanwhile, the highest paid employee was let go around 10 a.m., while the second highest was let go around 2 p.m. The 2 employees had no idea their job was at risk. Our company was not doing any layoffs, had plenty of open positions at time, and they weren't told anything from their manager. Just came in one day and found out their department was gone. It was really fun at lunch that day when the 2 p.m. person was really confused as to why her coworker was let go at 10 a.m. My favorite part was how a different manager came up to me the next day and asked me about the job responsibilities of the people let go. Like they let go 2 employees without even getting an idea of what they were working on. Also, I sat next to their desks. I was not in their department, so why would I know? Story 42. There is a case right now in Congress where a soldier was offered $6,000 to separate voluntarily. He had PTSD, which is a 100% disability rating. The paperwork they had him sign at his separation stated he couldn't collect disability. He is currently homeless, and they will let him collect disability if he pays back the $6,000. Just found out about that one today. Story 43. Local company went bankrupt. Bank took over ownership, had sheriff evict all employees next morning. Bank reps then put chains on the doors. Nobody allowed back in. A few months later, bank hired auction company to sell assets. I went to auction. Each office was sold complete, with each door numbered. If you won an office, they gave you the key, and you had to take everything out that day. It made me sick to see these offices the same as the day the company closed. Coats on hangers, family photos, personal possessions, work folders and papers on desks, as if they'd just gone out to lunch. Horrible what they did to those workers. Everyone there was horrified. Thought it had to be illegal, but no, it very much happened. Property was sold too, and turns out company had been dumping chemicals out back for decades. So even new owner got screwed too, to tune of millions for cleanup. Story 44. Had a coworker tell me about one of her previous jobs. Corporate and HR had required everyone meet at a neutral location for a business-type luncheon. Upon arrival, the employees, 300, were split into 2 different rooms. The people in room A were told they were losing their jobs due to some loss of stocks and being forced to downsize, but were being offered a sizable severance. The people in room B were told they would be keeping their jobs, but would also be taking the workload of those in room A. After the meeting, they all had to eat together as it was a requirement to be there. Story 45. Not HR, but something that happened to me. Was going through a real crafty divorce. Literally a month earlier, she had convinced me to quit my cushy government job and get a job closer to home. This is before crap hit the fan. I did, and it said new job. I was about a week after court papers, etc., and life was really hard. I went to get lunch and left my computer unlocked by accident. My new manager at new place of employment read my Facebook messages, emails, and decided a guy going through a divorce? Custody battle was too much of an issue, I guess, and they fired me when I got back from lunch. My settlement was a whopping $5,000. Story 46. I was HR in the benefits department. We wrapped up open enrollment. I wrapped up all of our billing for our vendors for the year, was called into the director's office, and told I had 4 weeks. Luckily, I had a job interview later that week. I was told that I would get a severance, learned I got the new job to start in a week. I told my boss, and she told me, congrats, but you won't get your severance. Bullcrap. Story 47. I worked for a company for 2 years, got asked to relocate to run a department in a satellite store about 2.5 hours away, laid me off with no notice after 6 months. We've decided to go in a different direction. No complaints about the work I did, got a bit of severance and a glowing letter of recommendation, but it screwed me pretty good for a while. Story 48. I've worked in HR for more than a decade, and I've never personally been involved in unethical treatment. However, employees should leave an organization if their manager is crap, and top management is incapable of doing the right thing. I spent several years working at a company where the owners did not want to support ethical decision-making and allowed terrible managers to berate, demote, and fire employees who just needed training and guidance, and hire simply awful people. It sucked to be in a spot where you knew it was wrong, but not illegal, and not be able to gain a foothold to change anything. Very happy I left that job last year. Story 49. So a lot of crap stories here, so here's a good one. I was let go by my company after 5 years. Got a decent severance, around $10,000. Come Monday morning, I answer an ad for a freelance designer. I email the company, and within 30 minutes they call me back, and it turned into a 4-year freelance gig. Came out 10 grand ahead. Nice, huh? One other thing. Even though HR is letting you go, you don't have to tell them anything. They want all the info they can get out of you in case a lawsuit arises. Tell them nothing. It's none of their business. Story 50. Manufacturing company in the 90s. Company announces it will be moving an entire specialized line to China. Lays off everyone who worked on that line. Later that year, company announces we hit the financial goals and they want to share the good fortune. They give everyone a piece of junk, flimsy plastic, manual wind, 35mm camera with a made in China sticker on it. They must have cost all of $1 or so each. Within approximately a year, they brought that line back because the Chinese line couldn't make the parts right, but they didn't bring back any of the employees they laid off.